Here.
KJ.
Hi there, how are you?
Good
Hello,
Lord.
KJ.
Good
Great
to
to
see
see you.
you.
Thanks.
Great to see you. Good gracious. I'm so happy that you referred me to this speech from Rubio, which I guess was yesterday, day before, because
Yes.
I had not caught up with it. It's awful.
Yeah, what strikes you as most awful about it? There's a lot.
Okay.
Yes.
Xenophobia, climate denial, imperialistic, restore 19th century colonialism, Christian dominance,
Yes.
armies fight for people. When has that happened? Islamophobia, he elevates Columbus, American exception, Western civilization dominance, ignoring our own genocide, threat to global security. He sees a threat from the global South. He ignores Western civilization, slave trade, white Western supremacy, and that's the short list.
Yes, exactly. It's impressive, isn't it?
God. So I do have a couple of clips when we get to
Mm,
it, but
yes.
I I I did well. Got KJ No on again, friend of the show, activist, scholar, podcaster, educator, all around good guy. And so,
Sounds good.
so
If you and I'm also one of the co-authors of Killing Democracy.
all right, and
Okay.
author, Killing Democracy. Where can people get that?
They can get it on Amazon or they can go to the website of Badak Mera and they can find it. It's written in collaboration with Dan Kovalik, Jeremy Kozmara, Finian Cunningham, and Ron Rudenor.
Excellent. Killing
Yes.
Oh,
Democracy.
yeah. Heard of that. Ryan Ridenour. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, give us
Well,
your.
there are two of them. There are two Ron Rudenors. The one that you've probably
Okay.
heard of is the guy who revealed a My Lai to the world.
Okay. Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
guy has passed away. This is a different Ron.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
All right. All right. So, Harvey, you wanted to start where?
I want to start with letting KJ know, give us his uh, current take on uh, where the standoff with Iran is going.
And then we'll get into Rubio's speech. Guys.
Yeah.
Yes. So, what do you think, KJ? Is the second battle group, is the second carrier battle group there just to delay things, or are they going to try and intimidate Iran into capitulation? Or
You know, I really think they are trying to intimidate Iran, but be careful what you wish for, because it's like the dog that catches up with the truck. Now, what are you going to do, right? Because Iran has signaled that it is going to fight back and it's going to fight back hard. U.S. does not have a ground game there. And if it doesn't have a ground game, the only thing that it can do is make symbolic strikes, which are probably not going to be very effective, given that the Russians and the Chinese have given some very advanced air defense systems and radar systems. So the US is going to find out that really that it's, a bit off more than it can chew for. And on the other hand, if it does, if it wants to go beyond a mere symbolic attack, then we're talking about nuclear. And that's going to be a global catastrophe. So I don't see any good solutions here. I mean, the US may still be, thinking about regime change, but I don't see that happening.
no, no.
Mm.
And the good solution from my perspective is Trump puts his tail between his legs and brings them both out. That's the
Yeah,
only good solution I see.
I agree. I agree. Yes, he should, graciously, retreat. And I'm sure the Iranians will give him, something that he can claim, so that it doesn't look like a total defeat. But
Yeah,
remember,
I think,
yeah,
yeah, you're right.
go ahead.
Go ahead. I don't think Trump wants this. I think he's scared to death, and he's
Hmm.
under so much pressure from all the Israel hawks circling him.
Yes.
So So, and I was thinking that if he was going to attack, he would attack when Netanyahu was actually visiting here
Mm-hmm.
this last week, because Netanyahu is probably the biggest coward in the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he would want to be out of the country in case Iran launched something at Tel Aviv or
Mm-hmm.
Jerusalem or wherever Netanyahu might be holed up.
Mm-hmm.
And, but that didn't happen. So I was wrong there, but encouraged. So,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think? Take a guess, KJ. What's the time frame on some sort of action?
It's hard to say. I really couldn't give you a time frame, but I think the U.S. Needs to act quickly, or it needs to bug out. Um, as I said, it doesn't have a ground game. It doesn't really have cards to play. Iran, on the other hand, has tremendous counterstrike capacity. And the other thing to remember is the US does not have the element of surprise this time round. Before, the first time, Midnight Hammer, 12-Day War, they had the element of surprise, literally perfidy, because they were pretending to negotiate, and then they went ahead and attacked the leadership. That was a huge mistake because what they did by killing off the Iranian military and political leadership is they got rid of all the moderates who were willing to negotiate, right? I don't know if you ever used those hand soaps that are like that kill 99.9% of germs, right?
Yeah,
You should never use those, right? Because
right.
they kill off all the good germs, and all you're left with are the really, really resistant
Yeah,
germs, right?
right.
That's exactly what the US has done. It's killed off, literally killed off, the parties in the leadership that were more moderate, that were more willing to talk, negotiate,
Yeah.
calm down, de escalate. And now we have a generation who were mentored by these people, but who are young and hot blooded, and they see how their leaders have been martyred by the US through extraordinary acts of perfidy. So, they're not going to back down. They're not going to settle for, some easy, easy out. I think that if the U.S. wants to press the war, Iran will come right back at them. As you point out, the neocons have wanted this war for a very, very long time. If you remember back in 2003, even during the Iraq War, the scuttlebutt in Washington was little boys go to Baghdad, real men go to Tehran, right?
Mhm.
They wanted a
Mhm.
war with Iran. They
Yeah.
wanted a war with Iran since, 1979, really. But the hawks have been ascendant. They don't want, they can't bear the idea of Iran because it thwarts their goals for regional domination. It's also an important ally of the rising multipolar world, one of the major suppliers of oil to China. It really is a kind of a thorn or, a bone in their throat. They want to get it out, but they really don't have the means. And certainly they don't have the capacity to take out Iran. It's a little bit like, I don't know if you ever watch MMA, but sometimes you get these like very, swift-footed headhunters, and they're looking for this like sharp, knockout blow to the head. And what usually happens is they miss and they're taken to the ground, and at which point the ground and pound happens, and then, they're choked out or their limbs are broken, etc. I mean, that is what the US could be facing
Mhm.
because, as I said, it doesn't have a ground game. It has a air game and it has limited, projection capacity. But Iran is a huge country, three, four times the size of Iraq, which the US never managed to subjugate. It has vastly dispersed forces. They've been preparing this, for decades. And the US really doesn't have the capacity to do what it claims. It doesn't have the capacity to back up its talk. And the only way it can back up its talk is to go nuclear, which is the most dangerous and deadly thing that could happen.
You think the Venezuela experience has given them a little overconfidence? I mean, can you really see some kind of SEAL team operation that's going to kidnap Khomeini or some? Good luck on all that.
Yeah, no, it's not going to happen. Whatever happened in Venezuela, and we still don't have the full picture, but it's like a magician's trick. It's like a conjuring trick. And usually when you have a magician's trick like that, the person in the audience is usually a Confederate. There was some kind of arrangement set up, and that's what makes it look like a magic trick. But in the case of Iran, I certainly don't think that's going to happen. And at the same time, you're right. Overconfidence really is an issue with the, ruling imperial elite. They think that they're smarter than they actually are, and they think they're more powerful than they actually are, and they underestimate the opponent. And that time and time again has shown to be a recipe for disaster. It happened in 1950, Korea, in Vietnam through the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It happened all across the board. It's certainly in the Middle East, in West Asia, in Iraq and Afghanistan. And anytime the US tangles with a country which is larger than Panama or Grenada, it usually tends to have a bad time. It usually doesn't turn out well for the United States. It's something to remember. The other thing is, once again, this is always important, is industrial capacity and economic capacity always tie into military capacity. And the US simply doesn't have the military industrial capacity to wage protracted war against Iran, which is what it would need to do. Specifically, the industrial capacity is lacking because the US has deindustrialized. It's outsourced most of its industry to other countries. The Biden administration was scrambling frantically to try and get India, Korea, and Japan to do the military sourcing for the United States. But it's still not working. And a lot of those components either come indirectly through China or, are reliant on Chinese rare earth elements, which the Chinese have actually cut. And, when the US had the 12-day war, they depleted somewhere between 15 to 25% of their missile interceptors, which experts expect will take them 3 to 8 years to replenish. So, this doesn't look good. It really, really is a poor idea. But that overconfidence, that desire to have a PR victory, to have something that you can play up in the press, that vanity is really the dangerous thing, and it's also the downfall of empires.
You mentioned the help Iran is getting from Russia and China. Could you go a little bit deeper into that? And then if the United States goes nuts, that signals to me that Russia and China will step in at some point.
Russia has been helping Iran in all kinds of domains. Primarily, it's suspected that they're helping them with missile technology. The Russians have shown proof of concept. They can hit anywhere they want to at incredible, velocity and with incredible damage, and bypassing all air defense. Iran already has a formidable missile capacity, but it's largely expected that Russia is helping them take it up a notch. China has also been helping Iran. It's once again widely suspected that China has been helping Iran with targeting. In fact, Global Times, the Chinese paper, was actually publishing targets, US bases in the region. I mean, this is like public information. I think that, that's how, if that's what they're willing to produce publicly, what do you think they're doing privately, right?
Exactly.
So targeting data using, Chinese satellite information. And then also it's been reported, not confirmed, but reported that China has been sending some of its most advanced radar systems to Iran. And these are the radar systems that can track stealth aircraft. Essentially, the US has always relied on having not just control of the airspace, but control of the electronic domain and having a completely transparent target. That the target country is completely transparent to them, and they are completely invisible to the defenders. And I think those dynamics have shifted significantly with Chinese radar, Russian air defense, Russian missile technology, and Chinese surveillance and geolocation technologies. These are big things. And then plus the fact that, Iran has already had tremendous preparation. I mean, it sent everything underground. It's like North Korea. It is prepared to wage war in a dispersed fashion from isolated and deeply reinforced underground sites. So Ferdo, as far as we can tell, was largely unaffected, despite claims. I mean, Trump claims that, they want to force Iran to, give up its, nuclear, program after having claimed, crowed that he had destroyed it. So, you need to get your story straight, right? But
Trump?
even yes, I mean, you're in the domain of propaganda when anything goes, right? It's all contradictory because they don't care. They're just throwing something against the wall to see what sticks. But we don't think that Ferdo was destroyed. I mean, whatever was sent in doesn't seem to have had any real effect. And experts have said that, if they had destroyed it, if Iran was able to move a small amount, of their materials and facilities, to a small basement, somewhere, they could restart the whole thing. They're already at 60% enrichment. They could create, centrifuge cascade chains that could very easily weaponize to the level of weaponry. And
there's no IAEA to keep an eye on it now either.
no IAEA anymore, yes. And of course, the IAEA shot itself in the foot because they were involved in leaking that information to the Americans. So Rafael Grossi, should be prosecuted in my view, or at least he has some explaining to do. But, you kind of undermine all these safeguards, all these systems of negotiation, communication, monitoring, and, rational management of risk. And then you're surprised. And now you're going to resort to, the fist, the stick, the knife, the gun. And, it's not going to work because you no longer have that transparent panopticon where you were able to see everything and do everything, and punish and threaten easily. It's just become more and more hard. So I think that these systems that have broken down all of these things are backfiring on the United States. And essentially the US, just as it's made the Iranian leadership more aggressive by literally killing off the moderates, it's also pushing Iran towards nuclearization, whether they want it or not, and they don't want it. Whether they want it or not, they're pushing them in the direction of North Korea. The Libya model is something that every country that is in U.S. crosshairs remembers. Libya disarmed, and that was the end of them. North Korea didn't, and it's still standing strong. It's, the longest socialist state in history. It outlasted the Soviet Union, by a decade at this point.
My worry is we attack Iran. Trump finally capitulates to all the pressure around him. And then Iran starts to level Tel Aviv.
Hmm.
maybe leaves our bases alone, but goes after Tel Aviv. At which point the Israelis pull out their nuclear weapon and launch it towards Tehran. Am
Hmm.
I nuts?
No, no, I think that's eminently a possibility. I mean, the piece is what will Iran do to counter a US attack? Certainly, they could attack the attack platforms. It's unknown, but conceivable that they could take out an aircraft carrier, which would the US would consider to be a strategic attack. They could certainly attack many of the bases. Almost all of the bases in the region are highly vulnerable. Iran, could knock out Qatar. I mean, Qatar's a tiny country. It's essentially the other Israel. They could knock out Qatar and all the bases in Qatar. CENTCOM is stationed in Qatar. They could shut down the Strait of Hormuz for a nickel. Essentially, that's all they'd have to do is snap their fingers, and the Strait of Hormuz is shut down, and then we will see oil going up to 150, even $200 a barrel. That will shock, if not crash, the global economy. And of course, as you point out, they could flatten Tel Aviv. And we've seen before, they're perfectly capable of it before they restrained themselves. So they sent very, very targeted weaponry, and it was, for the most part, aimed at specific military targets. But, they were holding back. So with the kind of massive missile capacity that they have and their capacity to overrun and overwhelm Israeli and US air defenses, Tel Aviv, could be pancaked, it could be flattened. And then you're right. How will the Israelis respond? They could respond with tactical nukes or even strategic nukes. And there may be even factions that are speaking of doing a preemptive attack on Tehran in order to prevent that. So there's some extraordinary, extraordinary dangerous dynamics going on. And, as I've said over and over again, we cannot ignore the risk of nuclear war. The nuclear backstop is ultimately what they're counting on. They're hoping that there's enough kind of threat, coercion that they can get Iran to bend over the table. But Iran's not going to do that.
Not
It
this
knows,
time.
yeah, it can't. I mean, it's not going to surrender everything. I mean, it's what the U.S. is demanding is not negotiation; it's demanding surrender.
Mhm.
And Iran is saying, if you want us to surrender, you and which army? Literally, you and which army? Where are your land forces? Iraq required, there was a buildup of months, 400,000 troops, right? Still wasn't enough. Where's your buildup? A couple of aircraft carriers? No, I don't think so.
Good grief. And then
Why does Iran not have a nuclear umbrella from Pakistan, from Russia? That would seem to me be uh, some some level of protection against an attack by Israel.
Well, first, we
Might,
don't know. We don't know if it has, and we could actually say that indirectly it may have. It may have a set of, kind of connected agreements that put it under a de facto nuclear umbrella. But I think the key issue is doctrinal. I mean, there has been a fatwa against the use of
Mhm.
nuclear weapons. I mean, the Iranian leadership, in this sense, I believe is very, very wise. I mean, this is what any, wise and humane policy would be, to outlaw nuclear weapons and the use of nuclear weapons. But I think that fatwa is being salami sliced, if for no other reason than through necessity, because it looks like it's just getting closer and closer to the nuclear precipice. And if a nuclear deterrent is the only thing that prevents a nuclear strike, then that could very rapidly come into play. Certainly, they have the technical capacity.
sure.
Mhm.
And the real problem is we don't have many really sane people in leadership that have their fingers close to the nuclear button. I mean, I wouldn't trust Netanyahu. Harvey mentioned Pakistan. Oh my gosh. I mean, Pakistan could go off the rails quickly if it got on Iran's side. So and so
The other thing to me is we talk about, targeting Khomeini or somehow figuring out where he is and take him out. There goes the fatwa.
Yes, there you go. So it's, more of the same. You knock out the moderates, you're just going to get more and more, angry and more aggressive leadership. So I think it's very, very unwise. I mean, in some sense, it's to your advantage to support. It's to the advantage of the United States to support, the current state of affairs, because at least they are capable of they have meaningfully de-escalated with the U.S. in the past. When the U.S. struck, they responded only with symbolic strikes. But you knock out the top leadership at this point, you might find that you're just going to get something much, much more dangerous and aggressive towards the United States. So very, very bad idea. Coming back to this notion of sanity, uh, like Jim, I think that we overestimate, the sanity of our leaders when we assume when there's an assumption of sanity. I think that any reasoned analysis of U.S. policy, uh, certainly nuclear policy, would make you doubt whether our leaders are actually sane. And certainly Donald Trump has said, we have these nuclear weapons. Why can't we use them? Right? That's his thinking.
Exactly. On a similar issue, but a little bit different, the more I hear about and read about all the protests in Iran and the response, the deadly response from the Iranian government, the more I think, the more I read that the CIA and Mossad were the instigators.
Definitely. I mean, they've actually bragged about it, right? And Mike Pompeo, is in the public, congratulating and saying, thanking the Mossad for, their participation in this. But certainly it was instigated. It's an off-the-rack color revolution, which is not to say, there aren't Iranians who don't have legitimate gripes against their government. As all people, all citizens of all governments tend to have gripes against their government. But this specific set of protests was caused by the U.S. doing a currency run against Iran, destroying, its economy. And Bessent has come out and actually,
I know.
Yes, he's acknowledged that he's done that. And so first you create the economic pressure, then people are out in the streets, and then you hijack these protests and turn them into a Maidan type color revolution, killing people, killing, the police, killing, attacking and burning mosques, right? That tells you something about the nature of these protests. And then when the government clamps down and clamps down rapidly and hard, then you try to use that as, casus belli, responsibility to protect, etc. So we see the standard map, the standard color revolution, program being rolled out. And it's also to delegitimate the Iranian government. It's to demonize them. It's to manufacture consent against them. It's essentially the information war run up towards kinetic attacks or kinetic war. But it's not quite working. First, what they smuggled in, thousands, 30,000 Starlink terminals. There's some ridiculous number of Starlink terminals that they were using to coordinate their, color revolution. And with the help of the Iranians shut down that immediately. They shut it down very, very fast. And then that neutralized their communication system, which essentially neutered it. And so once again, you see the influence or the support of China in electronic warfare. Technically, that kind of stuff is not supposed to happen. But, over the years from the warfare in Ukraine and then other developments, we see that other countries of the global South are able to neutralize and undermine US electronic warfare and electronic communication systems. So that has to be a wake-up call too.
Yeah, because you mentioned Maidan, and for the listeners, that was the revolution back in 2014 that generated the problems that we continue to have in Ukraine.
Yes.
So
which involved the mass killing of protesters, which we now know was instigated by the fascist right in order to create a pretense.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So do we want to turn to little Marco's speech? I mean, and to be completely honest, the first time I heard he gave a speech, but I didn't dig into much of it until you sent me that email this morning. And so I'm reading it and I'm listening to it, and it is just absolutely awful. And I can't help but remember, because Harvey and I have done a number of shows on JFK's peace speech back in 1963, in June of 1963. And I'm thinking, that was the light side. That was the hope of the world. And this is the dark side. This is taking the world in the direction of Western civilization only, or let's see if I can. Harvey, you're going to have to help me out with quoting George Wallace, but Western civilization now, Western civilization forever, or something like that. Remember when he talked about segregation, Harvey?
Yeah.
What did George
segregation?
Wallace? Yeah, segregation. Segregation then, segregation now, segregation forever.
Today, tomorrow, forever. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
that's what Rubio is reminding me of. Western civilization then, Western civilization now, and Western civilization forever. And I'm thinking, wow, he really is so terrible and recreating all kinds of horror.
And Wallace was the devil. Now Wallace doesn't look that bad.
No, he doesn't.
He actually repented.
Yeah. I've got a couple of clips with KJ. Give your assessment, because I'm off the rails with regard to this speech.
Well, yeah. I mean, the first thing to point out, as you point out, it is Western civilization now, Western civilization in the past, Western civilization forever. And the other thing to highlight is he insists that Western civilization is the only civilization. I mean, really, literally, that is what he's saying. And that, Europe and the United States, we together are the guardians of the flame of, human civilization. So it's extraordinary, but reminds me of, the quote by Gandhi when, somebody asked him, well, what do you think about Western civilization? To which Gandhi said, I think it would be a good idea.
Worth a try.
That's right. Well, and when I listen to his speech, I'm thinking, Jesus, this is equal opportunity as far as going after everything. And I do have a clip here, which it's early on, and it kind of sets the tone for talking about just revisionism. So here he is. Here's Marco Rubio talking about the climate.
To appease a climate cult, we have imposed energy policies on ourselves that are impoverishing our people, even as our competitors exploit oil and coal and natural gas and anything else, not just to power their economies, but to use as leverage against our own.
So there, that was early on, and I'm going, good Lord, he is totally missing the climate change issues. And when you look at things, China is going after solar like nobody's business. I think I saw that China has actually leveled out its emissions over the
And it's
last year.
shrinking. It's shrinking, yes. It's constantly shrinking. Seems to have peaked at 2024 and is just going down, down, down. And it's also helping the rest of the world go down because it's providing solar panels at such a affordable cost that the countries of the global South, Africa, Cuba, all these countries are just like stocking up with solar panels. And, some very foolish people like Alfred McCoy say, well, each empire is characterized by its control over a certain type of energy. That is to say, there were empires built on slave labor, and then there were slave energy, human energy. There are empires built on coal, that's, the British Industrial Revolution. There are empires built on oil, that's the American empires, etc. And then he says, now there's going to be another empire that's built on solar. And that's going to be the Chinese empire. It's absolute nonsense. It's complete and total BS. For the simple reason is that you can control human bodies, you can control the supply and the circulation of coal and oil, but nobody controls the sun. The wind, the waves, and the sun are a global good for everybody. The sun shines everywhere. And China, by giving people the means of production or the means of capture of production of energy, the means of capturing this abundant energy, is actually liberating these countries. It's not a form of colonization of energy. It's actually a form of liberation. And that's why you have to take people like Alfred McCoy with not just a pinch of salt, but an entire salt lake, because he's doing the work of empire for them. So yeah, China is doing extraordinary things with renewable energies, and it's actually giving the world a chance to beat back the tide of global warming. I mean, literally, it really is giving us a reasonable chance to mitigate some of the worst effects of global warming, as well as liberate the global South. But the U.S. wants to double down on fossil fuels. I mean, it's a petrodollar fueled economy, and when they use language, I mean, they've always said that. Global warming was a Chinese conspiracy to undermine the US economy. That tells you how absolute total bonkers they are. If they think that, they know nothing about science, which is to say they know nothing about basic economic production. And that's why there's almost no hope. So when Marco Rubio says things like climate cult, like that people who believe that we should have a sustainable planet are just belonging to an irrational cult, then it's game over. It's just like, whoa, where do we go from here?
Exactly.
Do you think that China can basically rev up its provision of solar panels to Cuba right now?
It is already. Yes, it's sending massive amounts of solar panels to Cuba. As you know, the key bottleneck for Cuba is energy, in particular oil.
Yeah.
The unfortunate thing is oil is not just for electricity generation. You need it for chemicals, and you need it for fertilizer, agriculture, all kinds of things. And so there are, gaps there. But even so, being able to generate electricity without without that total bottleneck, it's a little bit like a chokehold. It's like you're being put into a chokehold, and you haven't broken out of it, but you're able to turn your head a little bit to the side so that you can continue to breathe. And in that situation, every breath counts. And so the solar panels will make a difference. Certainly China is doing the best that it can. I heard Mexico is also sending oil. So countries are doing the best they can. These are genocidal sanctions. They're designed to choke off and kill off Cuba, just as they have been doing with Gaza. And it's been, a 70-year plan. But I don't think it's going to be successful. I don't think Russia, China, and the global South is going to happen. And on the other hand, on the, kind of big picture thing, China has demonstrated three key things that are very important for global development. Prior to the rise of China, it was always assumed, it was almost axiomatic, that if you wanted to develop, you had to become more capitalist. In other words, you had to become you had to become a tenant farmer on the global capitalist plantation. But you had to become more capitalist, and you also had to become more Western. And you had to become more carbon intensive. Those were the kind of three core tenets of any economic development: more capitalist, more Western in your governance and architecture and etc., and more carbon intensive. And China's blown all three of those assumptions right out of the water. Certainly, it hasn't become more capitalist, it hasn't become more Western, and it has shown against all the odds that you can develop without becoming more carbon intensive. These are kind of groundbreaking transformations in the global structure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Gaza, and I gotta play this because Rubio talks about the UN.
For example, the United Nations still has tremendous potential to be a tool for good in the world. But we cannot ignore that today, on the most pressing matters before us, it has no answers and has played virtually no role. It could not solve the war in Gaza. Instead, it was American leadership that freed captives from barbarians and brought about a fragile truce. It has not solved the war in Ukraine. It took American leadership in partnership with many of the countries here today just to bring the two sides to the table in search of a still elusive peace. It was powerless to constrain the nuclear program of radical Shia clerics in Tehran. That required 14 bombs dropped with precision from American B-2 bombers. And it was unable to address the threat to our security from a narco-terrorist dictator in Venezuela. Instead, it took American special forces to bring this fugitive to justice. In a perfect world, all of these problems and more would be solved by diplomats and strongly worded resolutions. But we do not live in a perfect world. And we cannot continue to allow those who blatantly and openly threaten our citizens and endanger our global stability to shield themselves behind abstractions of international law which they themselves routinely violate.
So somebody needs to take over for a second. I need to get an airsick bag because I'm just gonna.
How many U.S. vetoes of Security Council resolutions? I think it was 6 the last time I counted.
It's absurd, right? Right. The UN was not able to do its work in preventing the Gaza genocide because the US vetoed all the resolutions. So to say that the UN played no role while omitting the fact that it was the US which disabled the UN's role tells you how extraordinarily disingenuous this is. Also about the mullahs in Iran building nuclear bombs. Nonsense. As I said, there is a fatwa against nuclear weapons development. Narco-terrorist dictator. I mean, come on, this is from Marco Rubio himself, right? I mean, this is the family business, and so on and so on. So it's like, where do you start when you have such like concentrated, mendacity? It really speaks to the fundamental dishonesty of the Western ruling imperial elite, that they can mouth this like condensed bomb of lies and still be applauded at the end of this. It is very, very stunning.
Yeah, that I want to follow up on the point you just made right there, but I do want to get this one clip in, this last clip about immigration, because at one point Rubio said immigrants came and settled this country, and then he goes ahead and vilifies immigrants later on because they're not the white guy immigrants. So
we opened our doors to an unprecedented wave of mass migration that threatens the cohesion of our societies, the continuity of our culture, and the future of our people. We made these mistakes together. And now, together, we owe it to our people to face those facts and to move forward, to rebuild.
So there he is talking about our immigration challenge, Europe's immigration challenge, and earlier in the speech, and I recommend this speech to everybody, but please have some crackers or a bucket near you because it's going to upset your stomach. Because he talks about immigration, he never talks about our genocide because we were the immigrants who were killing the indigenous, but now he's condemning the immigrants that are moving into Europe, moving into the United States. So, KJ, your comment.
Yeah, I mean, so again, this kind of concentrated hyper-mendacity, quite extraordinary, the sheer brazenness of this. As you point out, failure to mention the real context of quote unquote immigration. I mean, settler colonialism is a kind of immigration, if you will. But
he elevates Columbus. He elevates Columbus.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes, and then fluffs up European colonialism. He's saying that the U.S. and Europe are tied together in our. He doesn't say it in these words, but we're tied together in our colonial bloodbaths. These are the ties that bind. And then we opened up to waves of immigrants. The U.S. has imported immigrants, and then it reduces the supply of immigrants, it opens them, closes them. It does this for domestic reasons because it wants to control and discipline labor. If you have a large surplus army of unemployed people who are willing to work for no rights, then what this does is it disciplines labor and it forces wages down and it threatens the working class in general. So it's really a strategy of divide and conquer using the proletariat of the United States and the proletariat of the global South to compete against each other and to force a race to the bottom. And then once having done that, then they want to then scapegoat the immigrants. They want to use the white working class to encourage them to scapegoat the immigrants and use them to blame for what is essentially the breakdown and the immiseration and the violence of capitalism. And then, he wants the Europeans to get online with this worldview. So, yeah, it's extraordinary. It is really, really extraordinary. And it's happening, in the current context of these massive ICE raids in the United States, which the vast majority of people understand are, violent, brutal, and illegal, or breaking all the laws. So, yeah, and the hypocrisy is off the charts. But, who am I to say? I mean, it's just endless hypocrisy.
And I saw some of the comments or some of the questions, I guess, and I only got through one because the questioner, a European, said, well, we just had a sigh of relief. And I'm thinking, wow, Narco Rubio brought the Kool-Aid and people are lining up for seconds in Europe. Beyond that, what's your whole take on this speech? I've been kind of dominating with these clips and my despair.
Well, the way that I frame it is I call it the Marco Rubio speech. We could call it the project for a new Western century, like the project for a new American century. Essentially, I mean, he uses those words, a new Western century. Essentially, the project for a new Western century, the only civilization that counts. And it's, he first, there's the whining and the belly aching. Somehow the U.S. has been the victim in all the violence that it has meted out to the global South and other countries. And mass migration threatens the cohesion of our society, et cetera, et cetera. But then you see over and over again, we made these mistakes together. We are in this together. So you can see that there's an attempt to do some damage control after J.D. Vance's speech at the Munich summit last year, Munich conference last year, where he essentially told the Europeans, go F yourself. You need to buck up, go F yourself. Unless you fall in line with what we tell you to do, you are screwed. And actually, Marco Rubio's message is the same. It's just laced with more, flowery language, and it's more, let's you and I help us F you. That's really what he's saying. So yeah, I mean, it's horrific, and yet it's so nauseating. He says, we care deeply about your future and ours. We are connected spiritually and connected culturally. Our destiny will always be intertwined. Harvey, Jim, you can use that barf bag right now.
Exactly. One thing that jumped out to me, though, he mentioned Christianity at least twice, at the exclusion of Judaism, at the exclusion of Islam. Now, I knew he would exclude Buddhism, Hinduism, the other religions out there that are primarily global South and Asia. But with that, it was clear about the Islamophobia, but also instead of Christian, he could have gone Judeo-Christian.
Yeah.
Didn't, and I don't know whether there's any significance to that.
I'm sure there are people who will interpret it in that way. I mean, these things are carefully crafted, so I don't think it's a casual oversight, but certainly it is this kind of European appeal to Protestant or Christian values, and also, and I think this is important to note, is that he tips the hat that U.S. is declining, Western quote civilization is declining. He says, we in America have no interest in being polite and orderly caretakers of the West's managed decline. Okay, so he's putting that out there. He's acknowledging that actually this is what happened, but we want to rage against the dying of the light. And we do not seek to separate, but to revitalize an old friendship and renew the greatest civilization in human history. In other words, make Western civilization great again. That's what we are going to do. And we will resist the forces of civilizational erasure. Once again, this, extraordinary language, this notion of extraordinary victimhood, because the contradictions of the system are coming up to the forefront. So that religiosity tied with this notion of culture and civilization, combined with this sense of, supremacy, he calls pride, proud of its heritage and history, but really this sense of Western supremacy. It is what he wants to reinforce and nail down on. And the Europeans are eating it up. They love it. I mean, as the facilitator says, you heard the sigh of relief through this hall when we were listening what I would interpret as a message of reassurance of partnership. The thing is, once again, we have to see this as mostly rhetorical. Okay, I think what J.D. Vance said cannot be unsaid. It cannot be unseen. You can also see the actions of Trump. Those cannot be ignored. Rubio can come in with all the flowery language that he wants. But in a sense, it's like even when you oscillate and vacillate like this, the relationship is already damaged, right? You break up, you get back together, you bring flowers, you break up, etc. He's bringing the flowers now, but you can be sure that the beatings will continue in a short while as soon as the chocolates are finished.
Okay.
The beatings will continue until morale improves.
Exactly, until the civilizational morale improves.
What do you think the reaction of the European people might be to this?
I think that the European people are much better than their leaders. Certainly the leaders don't represent them. And a recent poll has said 1/3 of Europeans see the United States as a threat. So I don't think they're going to go for it. And then once again, if we look at the centers of power, like Chatham House has said that, there's been a revolution. Everything has been disrupted. We're not in Kansas anymore. We have to see the U.S. As a threat, and that we have to place our bets and hedge, not only economically, but militarily, against the United States. This is the stuff that is coming out of Chatham House, which is the heart of the European deep state. You also see it in Mark Carney's address at Davos when he said, we, the middle powers, we have to reconsider. Everything has been disrupted. And then most significantly, this was happening at the Munich Security Conference. And if you look at the language coming out of the Munich Security Conference, they're saying that essentially what we're facing right now is wrecking ball politics. That essentially they don't name the United States, but they know, but it's everybody knows who they're talking about. The theme, literally the entire theme of the Munich Security Conference is wrecking ball politics. That essentially the international system has had a wrecking ball taken to it by the United States, and how are we going to manage this? How are we going to deal with it? So I think the Europeans are not convinced. I mean, I think there was a temporary, catharsis in that moment because everybody was holding their breath, and what Marco Rubio said was not as bad as they anticipated. But, in the clear light of day, I think they're going to wake up and think, it's that line from that Fellini movie, the prostitute goes to the church and she prays to Mary and Jesus and the saints, and then she comes out, and in the clear light of day, she says, nothing's changed. And I think they're going to feel the same way.
Okay. And the reaction from the global South and from Russia?
Well, I think they are undeceived. I think the global South are undeceived. I mean, we have to understand a little bit about the Munich Security Conference itself. It was founded by, he was a statesman. He used to be an officer in the Wehrmacht, and he actually attempted to assassinate Hitler. But it was convened. It's a private security conference. It's what Davos is to economy, Munich is to militarism or Western imperialism, Western security concerns. And they're both private conferences, but they're incredibly powerful. They bring all the powerful leaders and all the powerful corporations and all the powerful interests together, and they set the agenda together the way that Davos does for the economy, Munich does for global quote-unquote security. But you have to understand the word security. I think I've said many times that when you hear language from the national security apparatus, you actually have to translate it. It has to be decoded. And anytime they use the word defense, it means offense, right? The Department of Defense is really the Department of Offense. It's the Department of War. When they talk about deter, they're really talking about provoke. When they talk about deterring Chinese aggression, they're really talking about provoking Chinese aggression. And I've also said that anytime they use the word security, they're really talking about hegemony, right? So the Munich Security Conference traditionally has been the Munich Hegemony Conference. In other words, how do we maintain Western hegemony over the world? And I'm not saying this as, kind of a, I mean, it's not a glib statement. You really have to understand that Western international relations believes that security can only be achieved through hegemony and domination. I mean, this is the basic tenet of offensive realism, John Mearsheimer and all that, is that we live in an anarchic world with self-interested states whose intentions we can never be fully sure of, and therefore the only way to ensure security is to dominate and to gain hegemony. So really, anytime they talk about security, they're talking about hegemony. And so the Munich Security Conference is really about the Munich Western Imperial Hegemonic Conference. But even inside there, we can see that there are fractures. There are fractures. They're not complete clean breaks, but these are stress fractures. And they've severely weakened this kind of international, coalition of the ruling empires, ruling imperial elite. And so it is under stress, and it is in a very, very deadly and dangerous point. And right now, what they're saying, the message of the Munich Security Conference is, we're facing wrecking ball politics. We're at a critical juncture. And we need the United States to step back up. Daddy needs to come back and reassert its strength. There's a section, waiting for the pivot. We need the United States to pivot. We need the U.S. to confront China. They say the observers in Indo-Pacific capitalists, U.S. willingness to substantively confront China is in question. In other words, U.S. needs to confront China. So they're trying to put this neocon agenda, this global imperial hegemonic agenda back on track, because they're not liking the way that the United States is sequencing. Which isn't to say the US has given up on hegemony, but the Europeans don't like the way that this is being rolled out. The US is not retrenching. It's resequencing. And what it's doing is it's shoring up its flanks before the major offensive. It's like when you play a chess game, you have, if you start out with a queen attack and that doesn't work, you pull back and then you build out your pawn structure, and then you do a coordinated sequential attack. That's what the United States looks to be doing right now. And the Europeans don't like that. They want daddy to come back into the driver's seat. Marco Rubio has flipped that on its head, and he said that the United States is the child of Europe, but I think that there is deep insecurity in the Western capitals, because they sense this Western hegemony is draining away from them, and they sense that the United States is recalibrating and resequencing, and they don't like that one bit. There's, to use the language, there's separation anxiety happening.
All right. Good Lord. Well, we've gone more than an hour, but I want to make sure when you came on with us, what was the point that you wanted to make that you didn't get a chance to make so far?
Well, I think the larger picture is a kind of, if you will, a global crisis or global polycrisis. It's fundamentally a crisis of legitimation, which has to do with the breakdown of the imperial capitalist West. It's no longer functioning as advertised. The global immiseration, but certainly even the global immiseration has come back into the core of the extractive state. So everybody's suffering. This is what the Chinese refer to as the kill line, where 60% of Americans live extraordinarily precarious lives. You get a flat tire, you have car repair, you lose a few days, you get sick, you're out on the street, you could be homeless. So the kind of precarity and the immiseration has reached crisis proportions, not just in the United States, but also in many states of Europe. And so we have this fundamental economic crisis, which turns into a political crisis, which then becomes a globalized legitimation crisis. And combine that with, for example, the recent Epstein revelations, right? Where you understand that all the institutions of the Western power elite are corrupt. We're talking about the Nobel Prize, that the chair of the Nobel Prize was a good buddy of Epstein. We're talking about all the academics, including the top left academic. All of these are implicated in a system of vast corruption, exploitation, and violence. I think that kind of sends. That just destroys the foundations of any pretensions to Marco Rubio's vaunted Western civilization. So the mask has fallen off of everything. It's Gaza, it's liberal democracy, it's notion of open trade and open markets. All of that has fallen away. And instead, what we see is rampant kidnapping, we see open genocide, we see open piracy, and then the economy, is heading over the cliff, and Bitcoin, is crashing, all these things. So essentially, this global polycrisis, and the only response that we're getting from the ruling class is, how do you like your oppression? Would you like it with a spoonful of honey, or would you like it with a good beating? And they're just trying to pretend or continue. They're trying to continue this, and they can't pretend anymore because Trump has pulled the mask off the pretense. But they're still trying to continue. That's why, the gun companies, the arms companies, the tech companies, the accounting fraud companies like Accenture, and the NatSec security surveillance companies, all of these, kind of the rogues gallery of the Epstein class, have been funding fora like the Munich conference. And now they're sending the message to the US, you need to buck up, you need to get things back on track. We still need to assert hegemony. Otherwise, we're going to have a tantrum. So it's horrific, but I think that it speaks to the way in which the ruling class is still so deeply attached to their notion of control, of hegemony, that they are willing to do anything to hold on to it.
Mm-hmm. And attacking...
Except they accept control by Israel.
Well, there are different ways of looking.
Epstein and Israel are almost.
Epstein,
how you can
Epstein
separate
was most certainly very, very closely connected to Mossad. Ghislaine Maxwell was, tightly connected to her father, Robert Maxwell, who was most likely tied to Israeli intelligence, etc. And of course, Epstein, met with Ehud Barak multiple times, etc. And there are very, very clear statements about Goyim and etc. Things like that. So that Israel connection is very, very clear. And at the same time, you see, you know, one of the key arguments for the Israeli lobby was put forth by Mearsheimer. And he literally wrote that paper about the Israeli lobby with Stephen Walt. And this is considered to be one of the ways in which it's one of the ways in which realism or offensive realism explains away the manifestation of empire. So it's both things. So on the one hand, yes, it's true. There is an Israeli lobby. It does have a lot of power in the United States. On certain occasions, it does make and break politicians, certainly does have effects on policy. But you can also show empirically that there are ways in which the Israeli lobby fails. It works about 85% of the time when it's aligned with the objectives of the executive, and it only is successful about 60 something percent when it's not aligned. And so what looks like uh, corruption or lobbying from one side, we can also see as tribute from the viewpoint of the global empire, which is the United States.
Right.
As Joe Biden himself said, if Israel didn't exist, we would have to invent it. And, European leaders have said, yes, Israel is doing dirty work, but it's doing our dirty work for us. And so it's not a binary, and I don't think it's as simple as saying you just ban the Israeli lobby and Israel, and that's the end of the problem. The
Right.
problem is much deeper than that, and it has to do with the structure of empire, of which Israel is a critical component and also a critical enforcer of.
Right.
And this is what's confusing to me, though, that Israel is a key, but if Israel continues to encourage Trump to attack Iran rather than letting sleeping dogs lie, then it is probably going to accelerate the demise of the empire and the hegemony, not only for the United States, but probably for Europe.
This is true. This is true. So you have to understand, you have to ask yourself, what are they smoking? What are they thinking? How do they think they can get away with it? And once again, it's that thing where they have boxed themselves into a corner because, they want to get rid of Iran. Israel wants to get rid of Iran. They hate it with a vengeance. The neocons, as I said, have wanted to take out Iran since the Iraq War, and even before then, right? I mean, they stoked the Iran-Iraq War, and then gave Saddam Hussein the precursors for chemical weapons to destroy Iran. They were hoping that Iran would be destroyed. The U.S. has never forgiven Iran for having a revolution and liberating itself from the petro corporations. So both Israel and the United States want to take Iran off the map. They want to wipe it off the map. They want it to vanish from the pages of history as they have, projected onto Iran. But they're facing some terminal contradictions because, this is not something you actually want to do, because if you did, you could seek good relations, or you could try and destroy Iran, but Iran has the capacity to destroy Israel. I mean, so what do you do? I mean, ideally you would walk away. You would find a way for a modus vivendi. But the problem is the ideologues. The ideologues are so deeply committed to, wiping off, Iran off the face of the map, that I think that, they don't know what to do. So the danger here, once again, is if we're talking about taking the fight to Iran, the question is, will it go nuclear? And if it goes nuclear, will it be the Israelis who are tasked, with doing the dirty work, right? They've done it before. they'll do it again. If they can do a genocide in plain view of the world, would they hesitate? What's a little bit of a nuclear detonation, against these enemies of Western civilization? That is the real danger.
Good Lord.
I agree.
Well, once again, KJ, you've done nothing but elevate our spirits.
Yes.
So, Harvey, any final question? We got to leave KJ go. What I'm going to do is put all of this on
No, I don't
YouTube.
have any more questions, but I would say I don't know if my spirits are elevated, but I think he does a good job of elevating my understanding.
Well,
Absolutely.
I think that's what we have to strive for. I don't think we do ourselves any favors by telling ourselves comforting stories. I think we try and understand the situation in its fullest and most complete way. And then at least that way we know what we're up against, and what the task is. It's not going to go away with us pretending that things are better than they actually are, or that it's simply a matter of stopping a simple lobby and that's the end of the story. It is more complex and more foundational than that. But I believe that we still all have a role to play, and there's still concrete things that we can do. They can make a difference. Most certainly, the U.S. can stop its escalation to war against the planet, but most certainly, most immediately against Cuba and Iran, and other countries of the global south, including China. I think that's the task that we have. It's the task of peace activism. That's more than any point in human history. I believe that activism is fundamental for our survival as a species.
So you're telling people to get out in the street.
Not just get out on the streets, but get out and do something, and connect with people. First, understand what the situation is, have a good critical analysis, understand what we're facing, start to connect with people, build relations, have dialogues where possible, build solidarity, build organized power, and then go out into the streets or go out into whatever form of activism, but understand that this is important. This is critical right now. And yeah,
I
absolutely.
just got this at the Chinese New Year celebration today that we went to in Charleston, and
Yeah.
they had wonderful performers and a lot of opportunities to have conversations with members of the Chinese American community. So this
Yeah.
was one of the tables. Yeah.
And there is possibility. I mean, the global south, if it's not wiped out with this final war that the empire wants to wage against humanity, if the global south is allowed to breathe and expand and live, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, the countries of Africa, the countries of Asia, Southeast Asia, China, etc. If these countries are allowed to exist and flourish and to build out a new structure of international relations, then there's a possibility for really a much better world, certainly a more just world. That is just around the corner. That's a possibility. But we have to stop, the empire of suicide from destroying everything. So that's really the challenge that we have right now. It's both, it's darkest just before dawn. We are facing, the dark night of human civilization, and we just have to make sure that the light is not completely extinguished, because there are tremendous possibilities outside of that. most certainly, ecological development, most certainly in new experiments and forms of governance, of politics, of human relationships. As long as we don't destroy the planet, there are new possibilities for creative flourishing and development.
All right.
Thank you for that.
Yes. So, well, KJ, anything else you want to finish up with?
Always a pleasure to have this discussion with you. And yeah, I think that, we stay strong, we stay connected, we seek solidarity. What saves us will be our connection and our solidarity with each other. Essentially, it's the work of love will overcome the merchants of death.
Excellent.
Excellent.
All right. Well, we'll let you go. And thanks, KJ.